has now mandated Apple to come out with universal charging ports. Apple is not very happy about it, and with Indian government also likely to follow suit, and that's the new story coming in, that Indian government may push Apple for a universal charging port, which is the Type-C charging port, which perhaps is universally used not just to charge your phones but also your laptops and other devices. Apple says if you ask us to make these changes now, it will hurt the Make in India plans and the Make in India story that is unfolding for Apple right now.
Yeah, Shweta. So I think the EU had come out with this ruling about, almost a year back this discussion was on, and at least 6-7 months ago, EU had implemented this rule that all smartphones, not just Apple, all smartphones out there need to have a single charging type. And after studies that were conducted, it was found that the Type-C charger, or also referred to as the USB-C, is actually the best option to have, because most number of mobile phones, smartphones use that charger anyway and use that port anyway. So it would be in the interest of consumers to have a single charger, and because also Apple and then every other smartphone maker, premium smartphone maker followed suit, with a new device they would not give you a charger, a wall socket at least, right? They would just give you the charging cable. So overall, the EU's estimate suggested that about $271 million would be saved by consumers if different devices did not have different charging ports. Now, it had mandated Apple to comply, and all of Apple's upcoming devices should use the USB-C. So Apple did comply, and the iPhone 15 incidentally happens to use the Type-C.
But complying with that order means changing the charging port in all of Apple's upcoming devices.
So now that is the challenge. I think upcoming is not a problem. Apple's problem is, and India followed suit incidentally. So India said that, yeah, I think EU's suggestion is great, and it's not just helping consumers save money, but it is also reducing the e-waste. You don't need so many cables, and so every time you change your phone, what do you do with the charger and what do you do with the cable? So it'll also reduce e-waste, and hence let's follow EU. And EU had set a deadline of Jan 2025. India said that let's look at June 2025, 6 months later. All of Apple's phones made in India should have the USB-C cable. Now, this USB-C cable can be implemented by Apple on iPhone 15, where it is using, and all forthcoming models. But Apple produces the 12 to 14% of Apple's iPhone production in India actually happens between iPhone 12 and iPhone 15. So you have iPhone 12, 13, 14 and 15 being made in India. Now in EU, I think Apple is going to make its previous models obsolete much sooner than it does in India. So Apple is saying, I cannot go back to the drawing board and change the design of my phones and change the components of my phone to comply with this Type-C mandate for older generation phones. So iPhone 15 and onwards is fine, but 12, 13, 14, which are likely to continue being made in India for the Indian consumption market and for exports to maybe other emerging markets, Apple is saying we can't go back and change that. So if you offer, or if you put this on the table as a mandate for all previous models, then the PLI under which we have taken incentive from the government to manufacture X number of phones, that is likely to get hit. And Apple up until now had a target to up the production of iPhones in India from the 12 to 14% range right now, almost double it to about 25% by next year. So those plans, those targets could, like you said, hit a roadblock if the Indian government insists on a Type-C charging port for models prior to iPhone 15 for Apple.
Absolutely, but that essentially means, and it's a lovely consumer story, because it essentially means the multiple chargers that you have will all go away. You just need one charger to charge perhaps most of your devices, including your laptops.
That's right.
And a Type-C charger is most accessible. It's used on almost all Android phones. And if Apple also starts, changing its port to utilize an Apple Type-C charger or a Type-C charger, it makes lives easier for everybody. So the diktat is to ensure that this is applicable from April of 2025 onward. May not happen by 25.
Yeah, I mean, I think for subsequent models it will happen, because EU is a large enough market. Apple's market share in India has also grown from about 2% in 2021 to almost 6% now. So overall, it is in Apple's interest to comply with all these norms emerging from different bodies, different parts of the world.
But for the upcoming new models,
perhaps not change the design retrospectively for models which have almost lived their lives.
All right, and that is of course Apple's story.